Good afternoon, everybody. I just have to get the clicker here. So it's a real honor and a pleasure to be here today to talk about the 15-year journey building an ecosystem around ATMPs in Canada, and then thinking of that model much more globally. I just wanted to start by congratulating BioCat on the report today and the work that you and everyone in the room here has done in building an ecosystem. You know, the numbers speak for themselves, but the amount of energy, the enthusiasm, and the confidence that I see in the room is actually really quite impressive. So look forward to engaging further. I lead the CCRM, which was tasked 15 years ago to generate health and economic benefits from the excellent science going on in Canada by bringing together, stakeholders from industry and academia, and industry and some critical infrastructure and funding in the space. But I wanted to start by introducing you to someone you probably don't know and someone I hope you know, to make two key messages to start. So the first is someone named Marshall McLuhan. And Marshall McLuhan was a famous philosopher in the 1960s in Canada, and he was a philosopher during the time when TV started to arise. He's the person who coined the phrase the global village. He's the person, he predicted actually smartphones and the internet. And he had a famous quotation called, "The medium is the message." And what he meant is that it didn't matter what was on TV. What was important was TV itself, that it was bringing together the world in ever new ways and changing the way humans collaborate. And so, being inspired by Marshall McLuhan, I think that what we've done and what is going on here is a focus on the ecosystem being the product. A lot of people I work with have their companies, they belong to institutions. Many of you have your projects or your technologies. And really, the product that we're all aiming for is building the right ecosystem. And if we get the ecosystem right, everything else falls into place. So, the ecosystem is the product. Now, the second person is the Prime Minister of Canada. Who saw his speech at Davos? Did anyone see that? Right, pretty good stuff, I think. He said there's a new world order, but there's great opportunity, and there's great opportunity in kind of smaller market countries working together to build critical mass and doing things together so that we can compete with the large markets like the US and China. And we heard today many times about how that geopolitics is playing. Well, CCRM has been thinking about this for 15 years. We've been building relationships all over the world, thinking that the only way to advance complex ATMPs is to work together and to work outside of the city we work in, outside of the region we work with, and in fact, outside of the country that we work with to get this done. So it's about time that Prime Minister Carney caught up to CCRM with his strategy for advancing things. So, early on in CCRM, we, paid some expensive consultant to analyze, the Canadian environment. And out of all that work, this is what I think was the basic message. When you looked at the left-hand column there of Canada, in terms of producing papers and producing patents, we actually ranked very highly compared to regions that were similar to us. But then when you looked at how many patents had to be generated for someone to be brave enough to start a company, Canada fell very rapidly. And a place like California was very high. 180 patents in California, they start a company. In Canada, it's like 3,000, right? And then in that third column, the companies that Canada created were largely virtual with not many employees. And what we discovered that although we were creating lots of companies, they were all going to Boston, right? So how do you build an ecosystem? How do you create critical mass if the best of the best is leaving and have to leave? You're not attracting anchor companies, you're not attracting investment, and the companies are leaving. So our task became simple. How do we create stickiness in the activities that were going on in the ATM space in Canada? So I thought I would just give a little bit of a brief history of CCRM to give you an idea of what we focused on. So we started by building an academic consortium, which then was the catalyst for building a very large consortium of stakeholders. But with that academic consortium and building that over several years, in 2016, we launched a partnership with GE Healthcare at the time to focus on manufacturing and building manufacturing capability, process development, early stage technology, scale up, automation, closing systems. And then we leveraged that activity into the launch with a hospital of a clinical phase GMP facility. And then on the back of doing work in both of those facilities in 2022, we launched a for-profit CDMO, and that CDMO's commercial scale facilities were launched a year ago. So focus on manufacturing. In parallel with that, in 2017, we launched a unit of CCRM focused on company creation called CCRM Launch. And at that time, we were part or shortly after the launch of the largest Series A in history anywhere in the world, which was Blue Rock Therapeutics. And we became the commercialization partner for the largest grant in Canadian history around synthetic biology called Medicine by Design. And then, we've been creating companies all along, but Notch Therapeutics is an allogeneic T-cell company that was sold to Roche, but it was the largest Series A in Canadian history. And then AvroBio, we exited from AvroBio, and that allowed us to actually launch our for-profit investment arm called CCRM Enterprises. On the back of that company creation activity, we did a partnership called Creative Destruction Lab, which is out of the University of Toronto, which is a great mentoring and investment activity. And then, as I'll talk about, we launched a venture studio called Venture by Design to enhance our company creation in 2024. On the back of creating that for-profit investment arm, we launched a foundation or a charity in 2023. And during this time, we also started to launch hubs around the world. And I'll talk about that strategy a little bit later, but it's kind of consistent with what Prime Minister Carney is talking about. So when you look at the themes here, the strategy for creating stickiness was build manufacturing capability, catalyze access to capital at the early stages, and create companies better. So increase or enhance the quality and the quantity of the deal flow in the ecosystem. So of course, like I think here in Catalonia, as I've seen in Barcelona, you have to start all of this with the right base ecosystem, largely focused on high quality science. So CCRM acts all across Canada, but we're headquartered in Toronto, which is where on the left, two gentlemen discovered stem cells in the 1950s. And we're in a facility called Mars, which is a 1.6 million square foot convergence and innovation center. And we're partners with University of Toronto, which is Canada's largest university and ranked number 2 in terms of publications in the health sciences after Harvard, and the number 3 hospital in the world called the University Health Network. But what's really interesting and exciting is we sit within 1 kilometer of 10 research hospitals with amazing clinical infrastructure and clinical trials going on in an area that is the 4th largest biotech area in Canada. And of course, you have to have the right kind of scientists and science going on, and we had to build relationships and get these scientists behind what we were doing. Janet Rossent, one of the highest cited pluripotent stem cell scientists in the world, was a great supporter. Tak Mak, who discovered the T-cell receptor, which is really behind the CAR-T developments that have happened, and Gordon Keller, which works on differentiation of T-cells. But really on the right-hand side there, Peter Zanstra became our chief scientific officer. And it was Peter 15 years ago who said, you have to focus on manufacturing. Manufacturing in cell and gene therapy is the gatekeeper to success. And if you can't produce products at scale reliably, they won't be successful. Now, foundational to creating an ecosystem and that focus on ecosystem development is engaging stakeholder groups. And so at the top, we started with funding from a very interesting grant in Canada called the Networks of Centers of Excellence, One program drove collaboration among scientists. One program drove commercialization, which we were a part of. And then another program drove knowledge mobilization and sharing in the ecosystem. And one kind of lesson from us from this slide is that all of the 30 commercialization centers that were created, the ones that were based within a university or a hospital or based around a famous scientist's work, were not successful being sustainable. And that's the one thing that we were directed to do, was to try to be sustainable. So in 2011, 95% of our funding came from the government. As of the last 3 years, with a team of 150 people, we don't get any money from government because of the sustainability model. So most of them didn't create an independent, neutral organization that would work very closely with academia and industry but not be controlled or run from academia and industry, were largely unsuccessful. And so creating that independent organization was important. The other lesson from this slide is that at the top there, we put together academic institutions plus 13 companies, Pfizer, GE, and others, and we charged them fees to be part of our network to match the funding from government. And we soon realized that as we engaged more and more of the network, that we spent more of our time trying to collect fees than doing good work, because everyone wanted to know, what's the benefit for the fee that I'm paying? And so we transformed that model to what's at the below is not a fee-for-service model, but an engagement model. And we realized that we needed to engage many stakeholders at a very low level and then focused ever more effort into the strategic partners that we had, so to create these triangles of engagement. And the idea was to focus on engaging partners as opposed to just collecting logos. And so I'm an engineer, and it was really about engineering the network. And I'm a very visual person, so CCRM at the base, all of these stakeholders are at different levels of maturity and engage differently, but the aim here is to align and coordinate so that if you folded all these up together, you get a nice pyramid, all balanced, and we constantly are trying to find ways to engage all of these stakeholders, government, academia, industry, and investors, to drive it forward. But that's foundational to, obviously creating a public-private partnership and the ecosystem. But I want to focus a little bit on those three drivers. The first one, sticky driver, success driver, was create better companies. And again, when we started 15 years ago, we used the traditional tech transfer model. We had a consortium of academic partners. They shared with us their inventions, and then we ran around like chickens with our heads cut off trying to figure out how we could commercialize what their inventions were. And this was a very inefficient process because 1 out of 100 inventions that we saw were ready for commercialization or in fact good. And so we still do that, and it's still important because we're engaging the academic community and the research community. But then on the bottom here, we created a different path where we created a venture studio, and we ideate company concepts with a group of experts based on what the market needs. And so this is market-driven company creation, which balances the technology-driven company creation from the typical tech transfer model. And whether it's a tech-driven or a market-driven process, we drive it through diligence, and then we ideally incubate company concepts as proto-companies within CCRM with our 150 to 200 employees, and we drive them to go, no-to-go decision points, and we graduate them and make real companies out of them when outside investment is available. And then we continue to support them with all of the activities and technical capabilities that CCRM has. And if we ideate company concepts that are too early to be companies, but they're really good, we send them through our charity with investment and then through this medicine by design process back into academia so that they can create proof of concept data that then hopefully will generate something that's worthy of then driving it down the company creation route. So this is a process where, again, market-driven company creation has been much more efficient. Now, for the 99 academic inventions that we see, we want to support them because they need to move forward. So we've created modules around market support, patent support, regulatory and manufacturing to help support moving academic discoveries forward. And here's an example of the market module where we identify what stage they're at and therefore what's appropriate, a number of modules that go from just looking at the problem they're solving, market analysis, right down to an overall business model. And we have that for each of those models. And I know this is a busy slide, but this is thinking about that venture studio model, where in cell and gene therapy, there's an incredible pipeline of companies now and clinical trials going on, and there's a regular pipeline of approvals happening, but only about 50% of the companies that are on the market have been commercially successful. And so when you ask the question, why are startups, and again, we're working at the very early stage, why are they failing? They're failing by poor market fit, market strategy, the team, and then access to money. And so the venture studio, that's exactly what we're dealing with right when we're ideating those companies, is asking those questions and designing the company from scratch to deal with that. So when you look at the track record of our venture studio and others, they secure 3 times more funding and reach Series A in half the time as a kind of a conventionally created company, 40% lower burn rate, superior equity economics at inception. We heard that about dilution, the issues of dilution. We can provide early, wet, and dry diligence because of the labs that we have, and much faster inflection points compared to traditional startups. It's really about designing something for success from the start. And we do this through a double diamond process where we work with a committee and we work with the internal CCRM team and a key opinion leader network, but we first of all do this very creative, expansive thinking about what are the market opportunities, and then a deep diligence process to narrow down those opportunities, and then we go through solutions where we integrate capabilities and IP and expertise from academia to come up with solutions, and then we narrow those down, and at the end we come up with a handful of company concepts that we support 5 at a time at the CCRM. Now what's interesting is that we actually have also an AI employee that helps us with this. And we've been able to do this deep diligence. It used to take about 6 or 7 months to go through all those options, and we do it now in about 15 days. But what is really interesting, this was a surprise to us, is that in these creative parts of the process, AI is driving a lot more of the creative process than we thought. AI is coming up with connections that the humans in the system are actually not coming up with. And that was a surprise to us as we started to integrate AI into the process. The second kind of success factor is a continuum of investment support. I mentioned that we create companies at very early stages and put some money into that. And then down here, we have a network of investors that are quite happy to invest in de-risked opportunities. When they're de-risked, the challenge is the middle here, that gap in the middle. And so we have a for-profit investment arm called CCRM Enterprises that we invest off of our balance sheet. And this year, for the first time, we will launch 2 funds with partners where we'll be investing other people's money in this process to help drive more resources into this pipeline of activity that we have. The third driver is this continuum of manufacturing capability. I mentioned the partnership with Cytiva. It's a team of about 50 to 70 people, it varies, that is on manufacturing technology platform development and helping to scale up and optimize processes in a 10,000 square foot lab. The partnership with the hospital, this was really interesting because as opposed to the hospital building a GMP facility in the basement of the hospital where no one could access it, we convinced them we should put it somewhere outside of the hospital. CCRM should run it so that we can attract industry to it. And we created the Center for Cell and Vector Production, which has 10 clean rooms. 2 of those are for viral vector production and 8 for cell processing. And then on the back of the access to these facilities for doing contract service work and building a commercial scale facility. We launched a for-profit CDMO, OmniaBio, and about 12 months ago, it completed a 100,000 square foot, 10,000 square meter commercial scale, late stage clinical and commercial scale facility. It can do both hoteling and full service, autologous, allogeneic, and has 180 employees at this stage. And that facility has a late stage MSC customer. It has a late stage iPSC-based therapeutic customer. It has a late clinical stage CAR T customer, and in the summer, the first viral vector, it's an in vivo viral vector process, will come into that facility. But that kind of represents the kind of expertise we've built up over time in terms of cell types across these facilities. When we created that Center of Excellence with Cytiva, we really went to fundamentals, this CAT-CT with Cytiva, and said, okay, we're engineers. Cells can be manufactured alone in aggregates, on carriers, in different hydrogels. There's different bioreactor systems that can be used. Sometimes we need to find a way to scale down to optimize and then scale up for production. There are a number of factors that drive production, high intensity expansion, but not only that, the cells themselves, because they're living, are secreting things, and when they secrete things, they can affect the culture themselves. And so this was kind of the format for then looking at all of the different technology gaps in process and all the different unit operations and starting to identify hotspots for development on patient-specific manufacturing or hotspots on bulk manufacturing. And in the patient-specific, it was all about automation, parallelization and real-time analysis. And in the bulk, it was around cost, post-production reductions. And then, of course, there's common challenges around aseptic coupling and closure and automation that affect both of those. And that was really the partnership that we did with Cytiva. Was Cytiva put in money, the government put in money, and they identified strategic projects of interest, and so did we. We generated a fee-for-service business, which made the whole thing sustainable over time, and both secured customers and partners for this. For Cytiva, it was about engaging customers, including clinical customers, being able to design in their technologies, and coming up with new platforms and having the leverage of government funding. For us, it was about the exposure to the Cytiva network, creating new platforms, sharing royalties on inventions that we did in development, but also it really catalyzed the foundation ultimately of OmniaBio because we had built all that capability around manufacturing. So this partnership was actually a catalytic partnership. The partnership with the University Health Network, as I mentioned, was unique in that the hospital had its own cell processing center, and this is a hospital that's Canada's most successful TTO and commercialization hospital, and significant clinical capabilities, but we convinced them to create the cell and vector production facility outside of the hospital to leverage CCRM's venture ideation and company creation, and that we would operate it. So the idea is we create companies, they become customers, but the customers are enabled by the manufacturing. And ultimately, that CCVP has then enabled or catalyzed the launch of a commercial scale facility, OmniaBio. So you can see this continuum of capability from work that's done in academia, a facility that both academic and industry projects can support, which is challenging to merge those two worlds together, and then OmniaBio, the commercial scale facility. So in terms of sustainability, we took this very, very seriously when we created the nonprofit. And so the model is really that at the nonprofit level, as I've mentioned, we bring together infrastructure, people, and funding around the networks, the core networks, and we focus on early stage manufacturing. We do diligence and seed investing, and we do tech development and venture ideation. But on the back of those activities, we've created about 22 companies where we take an equity position in those companies. We take equity when we invest and take a carried interest in the funds that we're creating. And then on the manufacturing side, we've generated revenue over many years, and we have equity in Omnia Bio as it became a for-profit entity. And on the back of those for-profit holdings, when we exit, that gives us money to sustain the not-for-profit. And then we take a little bit of that support and we put it into our foundation, match it with philanthropy, and that allows us to strategically put money into academia and the discovery pipeline to kind of drive the process from front to back to create that sustainability. All common sense, all really difficult to do and kind of put together, but it's a model of sustainability that we've been able to build up over 15 years, accessing private funding, public funding, and philanthropic funding to drive the process. So when we look towards the future, and we're looking again 15 years ahead, we understand that we've focused on building manufacturing capability, and I'm going to talk a little bit about an investment of government and private sector to drive AI and robotics in manufacturing. And we develop technologies, but we feel that in order to actually take this great science to new ventures and to drive adoption and accessibility in this very nascent industry, there's two other gaps that need to be addressed in the field. One is analytics, the fact that these products still need to be characterized better, we need better assays to release them, etc. And then the other area of development is around the logistics and supply chain. And so we, just like we did in manufacturing, we're building centers of excellence initiatives around each of these two so that we can do what we did in manufacturing, do strategic projects, develop fee-for-service revenue, and drive training to generate new infrastructure services and ventures like Omnia Bio. But what we've also recognized is at the center of all these activities is data and a poor use of data in the field. So there's a lot of data there, but it's not really usable, it's not digitized. And then how are we utilizing AI? And we're even looking far in the future and saying quantum computing. And so we've developed a partnership with IonQ, a large quantum computing company, and are creating something we're calling the Deep Tech Biolab. And so the Deep Tech Biolab is about taking biotech and flipping it around and putting the tech in front and starting to prioritize the deep tech and how it can enable biotech. And again, focusing on digitization, use of AI, and use of quantum computing to explore use cases at the interface of this deep tech and advanced therapies, the complex biology, the manufacturing, the supply chain, and directing some of our company creation and investments there, and really driving the creation of digital twins, for example, in each of these areas to drive some optimization and value creation at the interface between high-performance computing and all the AI tools and advanced therapy, or ATMPs. So again, this is us looking ahead 15 years. So just a couple of examples to kind of get close to the end here. Everyone here is probably familiar with CAR-Ts. This is where you can take a cancer patient's white blood cells, engineer them to target the tumor, and then re-inject them after you expand them, and they march around the body, killing the tumor. And there's no doubt that CAR-T therapy works. It has created efficacy data for a number of liquid tumors that blows any other cancer studies out of the water. But this process is not accessible and not adopted widely for a number of reasons, because the conventional manufacturing, it's not industrialized yet, still very manual. So high production costs, low dose throughput, high batch failure rates, and unreliable clinic-to-clinic delivery. But in our analysis, I would say that even if we could make these products for nothing, it wouldn't be profitable in the United States, in the US system. And that's because there's batch failures. Some patients' T cells can't be manufactured. And so they get exhausted, they can't be manufactured. And then some patients there's toxicity. And so when you have those, a certain percentage of those patients having to have extra care tacked on to what would be their normal therapy, it changes the economics. And in fact, it becomes uneconomical for many of the healthcare centers. And that's in the US and Canada. So one of the things that we're doing, and this is an Omnia Bio, as I mentioned, has $50 million from government that needs to be matched by private sector. So that's a $100 million project to create something called the Intelligent Factory, so purely automated factory. And first of all, we have a spin-off out of Omnia Bio that has AI experts, and those AI experts are actually creating AI platforms to analyze patient data to actually deal with that toxicity or the unmanufacturability issue. So you don't spend hundreds of thousands manufacturing something that would be predicted not to be successful. And then those AI experts are going to help drive and optimize robots operating CAR-T manufacturing. And the idea here is that Omnia Bio will create kind of simple Lego blocks, a module of manufacturing a certain number of doses of CAR-Ts. And that would be optimizing not only the process, but the analytics. And the idea is that we can just stack those Lego blocks together in the facility, the factory, to drive centralized manufacturing, but that we will use those fundamental blocks and utilize the global network that CCRM has with academic medical centers to actually enable development of CAR-Ts and also drive a decentralized model of manufacturing. The idea being that when this network is deployed, there will be lots of data that gets generated, and that data can then drive new tools and optimization for the benefit of everybody in the network. So there's a little bit of a centralized, decentralized process going on here. We estimate that the automation that we're envisioning will increase the square foot productivity of the facility by 5-fold. So a facility that generates 100 million in revenue will all of a sudden have 500 million in revenue as CAR-T therapies expand in the next little while. And it is estimated that by I don't know if it's 2030 or 2032, there will be a huge deficit of manufacturing capacity in the CAR-T space globally. Millions of doses will be required, and that production capacity will not be there. So key outcomes from CCRM. On the back of very modest government funding, government has committed about 33% to about 400 million that has gone into CCRM over 15 years. The rest has been generated through royalties, exits, fee-for-service revenue, and industry partners. And we've trained about 700 people, created manufacturing facilities. The companies we've created have raised about $1.5 billion, and we've created a playbook of a model of commercialization, and we've created a portfolio of companies that we can exit from over time and drive the sustainability. I mentioned Blue Rock and Notch. Persistence is a synthetic lymph node to do in vivo CAR-T for solid tumors. Apiary is a B-cell company that can produce drugs in vivo and actually release those drugs in a sense and response manner. And Spalding came from our venture studio as a women's health-related cell therapy company because we saw a gap in the industry in that area. But not only are we creating therapeutics companies, Linea Bio is a company that is creating GMP-grade cell lines to enable other iPSC-based companies that are being created in the space. And CADI is actually a training center to train GMP operators, because in the industry that expertise is needed not just for Omnia Bio, but a lot of the other CDMOs and companies doing manufacturing. So this gets me back to Marshall McLuhan and the global village, and the thought that 15 years ago we really realized that in order to scale we had to think about collaboration on a large scale. So for 10 years, we've been building relationships around the world. And now that we have this model of people, funding, and infrastructure, key networks in this hybrid structure that creates sustainability and a playbook to do this, we have now been launching CCRM hubs around the world. And this is about enabling the local stakeholders to replicate what we've done with the promise that we'll all work together through an entity we're calling CCRM Global, which is kind of like the Star Alliance entity for cell therapy. So bringing those hubs together to work in a synergistic fashion. So the hubs will focus on venture development, investing in manufacturing, like I've described for CCRM. But Global will invest in the hubs, matching government funding. It will drive collaboration among the hubs and then in the longer term, there will be a venture fund at Global that will invest in the best of the best coming out of any hub, so that funding is always available. This collaboration and driving collaboration is hard. I think we all know that. It's easy for people to say we're going to collaborate, but actually to have them collaborate and create those synergies is difficult. So the way that we're doing that is we know the things that happen within a hub that actually drive it to success. Creating good team, building facilities, generating patents, SOPs, creating companies and that. And so the idea is to incentivize hubs every time they do this work is to give them some credit, some points, an incentive payment. And then they can use that to either transact between the hubs through secondments or training or services between hubs or even licensing of intellectual property or company ideas between the hubs, or they can use those points for Global to give them cash to build new facilities or do whatever they want. So this is a very tangible way to incentivize collaboration as opposed to having people just sign up and say, we're going to work together. And it's a financial incentive that's really based on the participation rate that they want to have in the facility. And so in 2022, we launched CCRM Australia. In 2023, we launched CCRM Nordic. And Frederick is here, the CEO and you know, we'll launch hopefully this year a site in the US and focusing on one in Korea. And you know, there's something very special happening in Catalonia. And so one of the reasons I'm here is to discuss how we can partner in this global network around cell and gene therapy through a model like this. I just wanted to give a shout out to CCRM Nordic. They have 30 people now after 2 years, and this is the facility that will be done this summer that has, like in Canada, process development capabilities, and it'll have clinical phase 1 GMP manufacturing facility that will again support company creation and ecosystem building across the Nordics. So, final couple slides. This is a slide from the very beginning of CCRM. This was our plan, a coordinated, comprehensive, capital-efficient, collaborative model. Starting at the bottom by leveraging scientific excellence in the community, building networks, improving deal flow, enabling clinical trials, access to capital, and right up here to commercial scale manufacturing. And we've done a pretty good job of enabling those. The last one here is adoption and reimbursement. And actually, we feel now that that's probably something to tackle as a global network, not just individually with the CCRM. And of course, the strategy was always to build hubs around the world. So, in summary, we're based in Toronto. We have about 300 plus people, experts in the field, focused on company creation, seed investing, and manufacturing support. 2 hubs, one in the Nordics, one in Australia. Special infrastructure and manufacturing at the interface between academia and industry, but operated by us. And we have special skills in company creation and due diligence, and have created some really cool companies and a network of partners all over the world with plans to grow that network and do as Mark Carney says, build critical mass and work together with like-minded people with the similar values to change the world. My final slide is that ecosystem is nothing without people. And I was on an airplane going to a conference a couple of years ago, and I realized there were 15 people on the plane that all used to work for CCRM. And a light bulb went off in my head that this was an incredible asset for what we were trying to do globally, is that there were people who had worked for CCRM all over the world, and so we created something called CCRM Connect. And this is my leadership team at CCRM. It's a gender balanced team. We speak 50 languages at CCRM. It's a diverse group, and diversity means innovation and strength. And so I wanted to end my presentation reminding everybody that actually it's all about people. And that's the greatest asset that we and you, I think, are creating in our ecosystems. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'll end there.
Thank you, Michael May. Nice ending about people. Yeah, it's most important. And thank you for your detailed explanation. I think full of recommendation for all us. We don't have time for questions, but let me ask me just one thing, because I'm a journalist, I'm curious. You've been with us during 2 or 3 days?
And before, I'd been here before.
Well, yeah. And you've been visiting some places where we try to do and we develop cell therapies. Are you optimistic of our work and our place in the world?
Absolutely, and I will tell you that the world is talking about this place, about this region, about Catalonia, for sure. It's the strength of the science. It's your particular strength, I think, in clinical work. Mm-hmm. There are anchor companies here, and so there are pieces of the puzzle here that can be put together to do great things. And as I mentioned earlier, the kind of enthusiasm and there's a bit of swagger here today, which I think is really, really important. Yeah, so congratulations.
And a curiosity that doesn't have anything to do with what was this thing. Have you visited other things in Barcelona? Have you been walking in La Rambla or something like that?
It's a beautiful city.
Okay, thanks for coming.
Yes.
And thank you very much for your explanation.
Okay.